Last week, as many of you know, I covered the subject of Shamima Begum. Shamima Begum is a, formerly United Kingdom citizen. She, at the tender age of 15, along with Amira Abbasi and something Sultana, used passports, hers being somebody else's, to get a flight to Turkey and then cross the borders into Syria to meet their perfect man and join up with the proper Muslim caliphate in Raqqa, or ISIS, to be accurate. 4 years later, 2 dead children, 1 dead sultana, and Shamima Begum becomes noteworthy in the British media because she wants to now come home. And that's not because, after being forced out of Raqqa because ISIS were utterly decimated there, to the point where it now just resembles rubble, she then resided, because of separation with her husband and being pregnant at the time, himself being a Dutch citizen that fled to Syria to fight for ISIS. A convert. Good for him. He's in prison. She was moved to a Syrian, what we were called, or told was called, a refugee camp. Well, that's not entirely true. It's actually a Syrian detention camp. That's where she currently resides because of her own actions, where it was commonplace in Raqqa to see the head of your enemy in a bin, something I mentioned in both the videos I had done so far on her. The first being a timeline, and the second being an update because Sajid Javid revoked her UK citizenship, and I will play a clip of him talking about this in Parliament now.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the urgent question from my honourable friend? My priority as Home Secretary is to ensure the safety and the security of this country. We cannot ignore the threat posed by those who chose to leave Britain to engage with the conflict in Syria or Iraq. Over 900 people took this path. Without the de-radicalisation work of our PREVENT programme, there could well have been many more. Whatever role they took in the so-called caliphate, they all supported a terrorist organisation. And in doing so, they have shown they hate our country and the values that we stand for. This is a death cult that enslaved, for example, and raped thousands of Yazidi girls, and that celebrated attacks on our shores, including the tragic Manchester bombing that targeted young girls. Now that this so-called caliphate is crumbling, some of them want to return. And I have been very clear, Mr. Speaker, where I can and where any threat remains, I will not hesitate to prevent this. The powers available to me include banning non-British people from this country and stripping dangerous dual nationals of their British citizenship.
Truly enlightening stuff. Naturally, with MPs there is a discussion about this, and of course Jeremy Corbyn did crop up where he said something which I believe has been quote mined. I don't know the full context of the quote, so I'm going to play it for you, and then we're going to look at it.
No, because she was born in Britain, she has that right to remain in Britain, and obviously there are a lot of questions she has to answer, but also some support that she needs. And Diane Abbott set this out on our behalf yesterday in Parliament. She obviously has, in my view, a right to return to Britain. On that return, she must obviously face a lot of questions about everything she's done, and at that point any action may or may not be taken. But I think the idea of stripping somebody of their citizenship when they were born in Britain is a very extreme manoeuvre. Indeed, I questioned the right of the Home Secretary to have these powers when the original law was brought in by Theresa May when she was Home Secretary.
Understandably, with Jeremy Corbyn, he is quite passionate on human rights, which is why I believe he has taken the position he has taken. He has made it clear she should be subject to a lot of questions, interrogation. He didn't specify de-radicalisation, and many people, a lot of you, have said that she should just lie in the bed she has made. Other people were quick to point out that there is a possibility she could in fact come back to the UK because of her son, Gerard, and that is quite possible, although it is equally likely because of the father that the mother and son could relocate to the Netherlands. I'm not entirely sure what the politics are there, or what the Muslim communities within the Netherlands think of this, because I don't generally care about the Netherlands. Sorry, I've been a bit busy recently. There hasn't been much division in regards to what people think the government should have done, what the government did, when it came to addressing Shamima Begum. Now, the government couldn't, in Parliament, specifically address questions about her, because that would be a bit inappropriate. there are rules about that. Home Office can't comment on cases like that. They can comment on the bigger picture which you saw. But the one thing I did want to talk about that was quite interesting, and I had made a minor mistake in my first video when I mentioned a parent of those children. I focused on the father of Amira Abbasi, somebody we've barely heard anything about. Shamima Begum is the one that is featured in the news, not Amira. I would add Sultana, but she actually is dead. Amira Abbasi is still alive though, and so is Shamima. But Amira hasn't featured in the news, yet her father is saying she is safe, and would be safe to come home. An extremist himself, we're going to take his word? No, we are not. Shamima's father though, now this is where it gets really interesting. He does not have a problem with the government's decision to remove her British citizenship, and has actually condemned her for her lack of remorse for joining ISIS. Now interestingly, in all the things she has felt guilty about, she's felt guilty about talking to the media. I know what you're thinking. Well, that was a mistake, wasn't it? Because naturally, the British people totally want to be on the side of a group of people that have made the lives of so many people, so many innocent people, a misery. The argument being by those that were in ISIS, Jihadi Jack for example, and many others, that they wanted their caliphate and they wanted to be left alone. But that's not true. That's not true at all. You were spreading fear, hate, and pain, suffering, torture, agony. Hell, you were just death. You were death. And when you were met with a force, you had sympathizers commit atrocious acts of terror within countries that are themselves peaceful under the guise that an eye for an eye is somehow valid. It is not, and nor can you argue it to be a proportionate response. You ignored the will of the people within the countries you were decimating for your own sick, twisted fantasy of a caliphate. Therefore, your annihilation was arguably deserved. It's why ISIS is doing so damn well in Syria right now. You know, in that tiny little corner. Almost like the last city of humans in Ascalon. Now Ahmed Ali, her father, said, "I am on the side of the government. I can't say whether it is right or wrong, but if the law of the land says that it is correct to cancel her citizenship, then I agree." He himself respecting the law of the land. And it's quite interesting really, because he said a few more things. If she at least admitted she made a mistake, then I would feel sorry for her. And other people would feel sorry for her, and they would. Some just do because they're Jeremy Corbyn. But she does not accept her wrong, and that is true, she does not. There is not a shred of guilt in her, and the only thing you saw close to an emotion was born entirely out of exhaustion, having only recently given birth before she gave the ITV interview that we all know and love. So understandably, many do not believe she has adequately conveyed anything that could resemble guilt to us. And all things considered, it is quite the focal point. If you are going to beg to come back to a country that had, up until the point you left, given you a life that you deserved because you were British, only for you to turn tail and go for your paradise only to realise your utopia was actually dystopia, to then want to come back to give your child a life that you yourself gave up, but somehow think, well, my kid deserves it, and by extension I eventually will deserve it because I'm British, then you are sorely mistaken. I myself took the position that your son has the right to come here. Sorry, had. Because of you, he had the right. With your citizenship revoked, not so much. That's not to say he himself cannot be sent to a family member. And if that does in fact happen, so be it. If the Home Office allows it, brilliant. The kid is given a chance, and hopefully he won't make the same mistakes you made. The father also indicated that the daughter appeared normal and did not appear religious before travelling to Syria. This is backed up by the fact that in an interview she gave, she mentioned that she'd only recently found religion, which some would think might imply an element of either grooming or curiosity, we don't know which. Now Shamima, who is in the Al-Hol camp in Syria, said, "They are making an example of me. I regret speaking to the media. I wish I had stayed low and found a different way to contact my family. That is why I spoke to the newspaper." I do want to point out that regardless of you reaching out to the media, eventually you would have tried to come home, which means eventually you would have been noticed and summarily stopped. because of your relation to someone married to ISIS, you yourself being a part of it. I guess one could argue you are in fact a member of ISIS, whammon or not. Now, rather interestingly, and this is actually something I'm really interested in, a petition on the parliamentary petition page has appeared that will end on the 6th of May. This petition calls to ban all ISIS members from returning to the UK, and this will inevitably spark quite the debate. In fact, it has to, or it more than likely won't because it only says consider, since it has surpassed 100,000 signatures at now, time of recording, 564,433 signatures. Parliament has to wait for 9 days from now for a debate date, potentially. The government did initially respond back on the 27th of November. It's a typical response, really, but consideration for a debate on the subject of banning ISIS members from returning to the UK, I'm very much interested in this, because I'd like to see how people can argue those that fought in the name of ISIS should be allowed to return to the place they call, quotes, home, considering they had made a, quotes, home in Raqqa, which is now rubble. One of the major points about the argument of removing someone who went off to fight for ISIS as citizenship is that we cannot render an individual stateless. And at the same time, an argument could be made, is it the fault then of the country they originally come from or have dual citizenship within to then place that person within their care instead, or lay the blame on them? Although at the same time, just because you've taken citizenship, if they have dual, doesn't mean they go back to the other one, because they go to prison if they've committed a crime. And as Shamima is in a detention centre, or detention camp, sorry, it doesn't mean she is free to do and behave as she pleases in her rather exotic clothing. All in all, Shamima made a rather nasty bed of nails here. She's made things more difficult for herself because she's naive. She made a very bad choice, and unfortunately for grown-ups, you live with the consequences of it. What I truly want to know more than anything else is how you managed to get to the point where you thought it would be a great idea to go to Raqqa in the first place. How you got to that decision intrigues me the most, and it makes me chuckle that your father sides with the government because he at least obeys the law of the land, which is something you didn't do when you illegally took someone else's passport, used it to illegally leave the country, and then go join some terrorist organisation that is renowned for causing absolute torment to many innocent people in the name of their God. Anyway, last week I had a number of issues, a personal one more notably. Because of it, I didn't reply to comments. That was lazy, but I was in a very bad headspace. I'm not exactly doing much better now, to be honest. It's very hard to cope, but I will do my best to reply to comments. I will not be discussing what has happened, because that's personal, but I wanted you to know that I am reading comments, trying to catch up anyway, and I'm very sorry for not doing it last week. So I hope you all have a lovely 25th of February, Monday no less, and thank you all for listening.